Hi everyone, this is RJ from Emerald City Hockey with a big post-trade deadline update to our projected Seattle Kraken roster. The NHL Trade Deadline has passed, and I gotta say, it was one of those rare trade deadlines that actually lived up to the hype. There were a lot of big moves, and that means a lot of changes to this roster and a lot more clarity about exactly what the real Kraken team might look like. We're now under 100 days from the expansion draft, so it really is right around the corner. It's exciting stuff, so let's dive right in. We'll start with the updated team fact sheet. We have 17 forwards, 10 defensemen, and 3 goalies. So we're still approaching it a little differently than the Golden Knights, who drafted 14 forwards, 13 defensemen, and 3 goalies. And the reason for that is how many quality defensemen we already have on our blue line. Instead of drafting a few more that probably wouldn't make the roster, we can instead make some high upside bets on younger forwards that have a chance to provide some much needed goal scoring down the road. Moving on to the salary cap, we have a combined cap hit of just north of $67 million, which is a little more expensive than before the deadline, and we'll get into why that is a bit later, but long story short, given some players who it looks like will now be available, I felt that there were some opportunities to spend a little more money and really improve the roster. Now, that said, this would still easily be the lowest cap hit of any team in the NHL, so there's still a lot of room to work with here. And a lot of flexibility going forward, too. We have 7 players under contract past the Kraken's first season, and only 2 under contract the year after that. Now to the team averages. We've got an average age of 26.1 years old, which would be the 3rd youngest NHL team. So throughout these updates, the average age has fluctuated a bit, but it's really always stayed in that 3rd to 5th youngest range. So any way you slice it, the Kraken are going to be one of the league's younger teams. Average height 6'1.5", which would be the 5th tallest team in the league. Average weight 198.5 pounds, 15th lightest, so right in the middle of the pack weight-wise. And I think that's probably due to having some younger players who still have room to fill out their frames a bit. Average salary about $2.2 million, and that is for all 30 players, while only 23 will actually be on the active roster. So we don't need to focus too much on that right now. And finally, players by country. One of the biggest changes post-trade deadline, this roster has gotten even more Canadian. We now have 18 Canadian players, up from 15 before the deadline. We also have 6 Americans, 3 Czech players, a Swede, a Russian, and a Finn. Moving on to the roster itself, we'll start with the forwards. And this is the area that was definitely our biggest weakness before the trade deadline, particularly at the center position. But given the different outcomes from the trade deadline and which players are now likely to be exposed, I think we've been able to remedy that problem a little bit. And as I mentioned earlier, it has cost us some extra cap room, but I do think that this forward group is significantly better than it was pre-trade deadline. And we'll start with the biggest new addition to this roster, Ryan Johansson. Now, our previous pick from the Predators was defenseman Mattias Ekholm, and while the Predators decided not to trade him at the deadline, they seem pretty confident he won't end up on the Kraken. Now, how do we know that? Predators GM David Poile said yesterday, quote, "I'm not losing Mattias Ekholm in expansion." Okay then. So looking at the Predators protection list, that would require them to choose the 8 skater protection option, leaving a lot of their forwards exposed, including Ryan Johansson. Johansson was the 4th overall pick in 2010 and was a 60 to 70 point player for most of his career. But his game has fallen off recently, and he has only 13 points in 35 games this season. With 4 years left on his contract at $8 million a year, he's one of a class of players that GMs will try to dangle in front of the Kraken and hope they take. And normally, this is a sucker's game, and I've always tried to go cheaper with this roster whenever possible. But I'm gonna take the bait here. Yes, Johansson hasn't looked like his former self, but his underlying possession numbers are as good as ever, and while it's not translating to points quite yet, his on-ice shooting percentage this season is only 6.7%, down from his career average of over 9%, which suggests that he hasn't been so much bad as just unlucky, and we can expect that number to rebound to closer to his career average in the long run. While this pick is certainly a risk, Johansson gives the Kraken a true potential top centerman right away. Next, we have the projected first Seattle Kraken captain, Joe Pavelski. And this pick has stayed consistent since we launched our projected Kraken roster because it just makes sense. Pavelski offers elite leadership, and he's still scoring at a near point-per-game pace at the age of 36. But the Stars are going to need to clear cap space this offseason, and letting go of Pavelski's $7 million cap hit is by far the easiest way to do that. When it seemed like the Stars would be Stanley Cup contenders again this season, the thinking was that they couldn't afford to lose Pavelski, even for 1 year. But now that they may not even make the playoffs this year, Pavelski becomes less of a fit for where the Stars are right now, and the Kraken will happily take advantage. Next, from the Ottawa Senators, Chris Tierney. And he's another player who's going to help us shore up that center position. He's playing a little higher in the lineup than he probably should have to right now with Ottawa, and they've given him a very defensive role this year, which is something he hasn't really done before. But if he can slot in and be your third-line center while playing some more offensive minutes here and there, he's shown he can be a 40-point player, and I think that's what he can do for the Kraken. Next, it's Jared McCann from the Pittsburgh Penguins. While the Penguins did make a minor splash at the trade deadline, trading for Jeff Carter, their expansion draft picture has pretty much stayed the same, so we're sticking with Jared McCann here. There aren't a whole lot of attractive options on the Penguins, and McCann really stands out as a player to take here. He has an impressive 21 points in 29 games this season, and is capable of moving around the lineup playing center or wing. And from the New Jersey Devils, we have Miles Wood. The Devils sold off at the trade deadline, trading away Kyle Palmieri and Travis Zajac, and that's going to allow them to protect some more of their younger forwards like Mikey McLeod, Nathan Bastian, and Yegor Sharangovich. But that does still leave their leading goal scorer, Miles Wood, available. Wood went on a tear to start the season and was on a point-per-game pace early. He's cooled off a bit since, but even when he's not scoring a ton, I like what he brings to a team. He's big, physical forward who has good enough puck skills to play in the top six if necessary. He remains our pick here. Next, we have Jake Virtanen from the Vancouver Canucks. Over the last month, it feels like we've been going back and forth between Virtanen and Cole Lind as the pick, and the Canucks expansion draft picture was ultimately going to be decided by what they choose to do with a couple of their forwards, Tanner Pearson and Adam Gaudette. Both were involved in trade rumors leading up to the deadline, and the Canucks have now made decisions on what to do about them, which provides us with a lot more clarity on who will be available to the Kraken. Looking at the Canucks protection list, Tanner Pearson signed a 3-year extension on Sunday, so he will be protected, and the Canucks traded away Adam Gaudette, who we thought they would protect, so that opens up a spot for Cole Lind, which means the Kraken will likely not be able to take him. So we'll go with Jake Virtanen instead. He's a former 6th overall pick by the Canucks in 2014, and he's a big guy at 6'1", 226. And he's shown flashes of what he can do. Last season, he scored 18 goals and 36 points, but he just hasn't looked right this season, and he's been in healthy scratch territory. I think he's someone who could really benefit from a change of scenery, even if it is just across the border. Next, from the Buffalo Sabres, we have Anders Bjork. So Bjork makes his return to our projected Kraken roster, but this time on a new team. Bjork was traded to Buffalo Sunday night as part of the deal that sent Taylor Hall to the Bruins. And while he was no longer in consideration to be the pick from the Bruins, he reemerges as one of the more attractive options on this last-place Sabres team. Regardless of whether or not Bjork is the pick, this trade will be good for the Kraken because they'll have a chance to really scout Bjork over the remainder of the season and see if he's a player worth taking. He wasn't playing much for the Bruins and now gets to go to a team where he'll be given every opportunity to prove his worth, not just to the Sabres, but to the Kraken as well. Next, from the Los Angeles Kings, Austin Wagner. So if you follow us on social media, you've probably seen my prediction that Austin Wagner is going to be a 20-goal scorer for the Kraken one day. So sorry if you've already heard my Austin Wagner spiel before, but you're going to hear it again. Austin Wagner is a unique player. He has all-world speed, elite speed. He can go stride for stride with Connor McDavid like it's nothing. And it seems like he gets a breakaway every other game, but he just can't finish. So all you need to do is teach him how to deke, and he's a 20-goal scorer. And it looks like my dream of Kraken 20-goal scorer Austin Wagner is one step closer to reality, because yesterday the Kings re-signed Alex Iafallo to a 4-year contract extension, meaning he will take up one of the Kings' forward protection spots, leaving Wagner even more firmly on the outside of the protection picture, which is why I've upped my confidence factor to an 8.5. Now from the Philadelphia Flyers, Nicolas Obel. The Flyers have a huge surplus of talented forwards to choose from, which got even bigger yesterday when they re-signed Scott Laughton to a contract extension. So he will occupy one of their forward protection spots, and that's going to bump someone out of the mix, and we think it'll be James Van Riemsdyk. Van Riemsdyk is the Flyers' leading scorer, but his $7 million cap hit for another 2 years means he is a candidate to be dangled in front of the Kraken to see if they bite. And it is tempting. I think it's something Ron Francis would really consider, and that's why I've dropped my confidence factor on this pick to a 6.5. But I'm going to pass here, and that's because I like Otto Cuevas, who's one of the more underrated players in the NHL. He plays tough defensive minutes and brings full effort to every shift while having a very good possession numbers given how he's deployed. And at just over $1 million cap hit, he's a bargain we can't pass up. Next, from the Chicago Blackhawks, we have David Kampf. The Blackhawks did a lot of shuffling at the deadline, acquiring Henrik Borgstrom, Adam Gaudette, Brett Connolly, and Riley Stillman. And those acquisitions have pushed Kampf into a position to be exposed in the expansion draft. And I'm glad that's the case, because I really like what Kampf brings as a player. He's a defensive specialist, which I know can often be thankless work, but what he's done with the Blackhawks this season is really impressive. He starts his shifts in the defensive zone 68% of the time, far and away the most on the team. And yet he has the 4th highest Corsi and Fenwick 4 percentage on the Blackhawks. So he's starting in his own zone almost 70% of the time and still controlling the play as much as anyone on his team. Give me some of that for the Kraken's 4th line. Next we have Mason Appleton from the Winnipeg Jets. He's continued his solid defensive play this season on the Jets' 3rd line with Adam Lowry and Andrew Kopp, while chipping in some scoring too by going to the tougher areas of the ice. The Jets were quiet at the trade deadline, which leaves Appleton still projected to be exposed. Keep an eye on Adam Lowry contract extension talks. If he re-signs with the Jets, look for the confidence factor on this pick to skyrocket. Now we have Kevin Stenland from the Columbus Blue Jackets. While the Jackets traded away 2 big pieces in captain Nick Foligno and defenseman David Savard, they were both upcoming free agents, so it doesn't impact their expansion draft situation very much. It really comes down to the final forward spot between Stenland and Eric Robinson, and right now we're putting Robinson in that spot, leaving Stenland exposed. Stenland could be that final piece in solving our center depth issue. He's played as high as the Blue Jackets' second-line center this season, and has shown that he has all the tools to potentially settle into a top 6 role, although maybe the 3rd line would be best for him. Most of all, he just needs more opportunity. His advanced numbers are excellent. He's 2nd on the team in expected goals for percentage, but he's only averaging 12 minutes and 40 seconds of ice time per game. I'd love to see what he could do on the Kraken given a bigger role. Next, from the Detroit Red Wings, Evgeny Svechnikov. Svechnikov was my pick here before the trade deadline and remains the pick with the same very low confidence factor of 3.5. And that's because the Red Wings expansion draft situation hasn't become any clearer. Looking at the forwards, you have Giovanni Smith, Richard Panik, who they just traded for, Taro Hyros, and Svechnikov, and I wouldn't be surprised if any of those 4 were the pick. None of them really stands out over the others. But I'm sticking with Svechnikov because his possession numbers have been good, and as a former first-round pick, maybe there's some untapped potential left there. Next, from the New York Rangers, we have Julien Gautier. And I will say I'm a little disappointed to make this roster change. The Rangers had the worst expansion draft options of any team, but it looked like we had finally found a diamond in the rough when 28-year-old winger Colin Blackwell had a breakout season. But Blackwell has played too well. With 17 points in 32 games, I don't see how the Rangers expose him now. So that leaves Julien Gautier. His numbers haven't really jumped off the page in his 3-year NHL career, but he was a Ron Francis first-round draft pick with the Hurricanes, so that's why I think the Kraken will take a flyer on him here. Next is Otto Cuevas from the New York Islanders. The Islanders added at the trade deadline, bringing in Travis Zajac and Kyle Palmieri, but since those two figure to just be rentals, they won't factor into the Isles expansion draft equation, which for the moment feels pretty set. The Kraken will have some more prominent veterans available to them, like Josh Bailey or Nick Leddy, but I think the best move for the Kraken is to take a prospect like Koivula. He's got massive size at 6'5", 223, and could grow into a dangerous power forward. He's still got some developing to do, but he'd be a good addition to the Kraken's AHL group for now. Next, from the Tampa Bay Lightning, Matthew Joseph. And I've lowered my confidence factor on him over the past few weeks, simply because the Lightning have so many talented players they're set to expose. Palat, Joseph, Killorn, Gord, McDonough. There are so many directions the Kraken could go here. But I still think they'd be best served taking Matthew Joseph. His scoring numbers, 16 points in 41 games, don't jump off the page, but he's doing that averaging under 11 minutes a game. Clearly, he's stuck behind a lot of talented players in that stacked Lightning lineup, and I think he would thrive if given a bigger role. And he'd be a more cost-effective player than some of the other names on this list. And rounding out the forward group, we have the first Washington native on our projected roster. From the San Jose Sharks, we are projecting Bonnie Lake's own Dylan Gambrel to be the pick. We had him marked as protected until recently, with the Sharks exposing Evander Kane and his $7 million cap hit. But Kane has been arguably the Sharks' best forward for a couple months now, and we think they'll feel that at this point, they can't really afford to lose him. So Kane gets protected, and that exposes Gambrel, who has really taken control of the Sharks' third-line center role this season. He's defensively responsible, he's 5th in the NHL in shots blocked per 60, and he has more offensive creativity than his scoring numbers would suggest. Plus, as a home state guy, he's sure to be a fan favorite. Now we move on to the defensemen, and I think this is really the strength of this team. You have a good balance of offensive and defensive defensemen, some size, some skills, some sandpaper qualities, some youth, some veteran experience. This blue line really has it all. And we'll start with our first alternate captain, Mark Giordano, who will be our primary leader of this defense group. He's been the Flames captain since 2013, and even though he's 37, he still leads the Flames in ice time. Lucky for the Kraken, it does look like he will be exposed. The Flames have a trio of defensemen, Noah Hannafin, Rasmus Andersson, and Chris Tanev, who are younger, cheaper, and signed longer term. In fact, I've bumped my confidence factor up to a 7.5 because the other big expansion draft target from the Flames, Sam Bennett, was traded to the Florida Panthers yesterday, leaving Giordano as pretty clearly the best option. Next from the Minnesota Wild is Matt Dumba. So the Wild have a league-high 5 no-move clauses, which severely limits their expansion draft flexibility. If they go with the 7-3-1 protection option, that would leave Matt Dumba exposed, which is the reason there had been so much trade chatter around Dumba at the start of the season. But with the Wild outperforming expectations and firmly in a playoff spot, it's clear that for now, Dumba isn't going anywhere. The reason my confidence factor is a 5 is that while the Kraken would surely take him if he was available, I just don't see the Wild letting Dumba walk for nothing. There are a couple of ways they could get out of having to expose him. One, if they can convince one of Zach Parise or Ryan Suter to waive his no-move clause, problem solved. Or they could just trade Dumba in the offseason and get some sort of return. But until that happens, Dumba is the pick here. Next, from the Colorado Avalanche, Devin Taves. This situation is very similar to Matt Dumba's. If Taves is exposed, I'm certain he'll be the pick here. I love Taves' game. He's solid defensively, he's a good puck mover, and he's got a rocket shot from the blue line. But just like Dumba, the Avs have a no-move clause problem. If you look at our protected list for Colorado, you can see Eric Johnson taking up that defense-protected spot, forcing the Avs to expose Taves. But if he waives it, that would allow Colorado to expose him and protect Taves. Will that happen? I'm inclined to believe it will, just because it makes so much sense for both parties involved, which is why my confidence factor is only a 6. But nothing official has been reported on that yet, so for the time being, Taves is the pick. Next is Rodak Goudas from the Florida Panthers. So when I'm talking about the D group in general, I mention that sandpaper quality, and Goudas is the guy who brings that. He's a physical presence on the blue line, and he's second in the NHL in hits. But he's a good puck mover too. His possession numbers are top 2 on the Panthers, despite playing some difficult defensive minutes. Basically, he consistently starts in his own zone and moves the puck to the other team's zone while delivering some hits along with it too. What more do you want in a third pairing defenseman? The more I watch him, the more I think he'd be a great fit on the Kraken blue line, which is why my confidence factor for him keeps rising. Next, we have a new addition to the projected roster from the St. Louis Blues, Vince Dunn. I had held off on picking Dunn in the past because it seemed like a trade to another team was imminent. There were reports that he had requested a trade away from the Blues and wanted to go somewhere with a bigger role. Since then, with all the Blues injuries, especially on the blue line, they decided to hang on to Dunn, and there's been no trade chatter surrounding him at the deadline. Dunn's ice time has shot up to over 19 minutes a game, and he's shown that he could really step into that bigger role. But on this talented Blues team, he's still going to be exposed in the expansion draft, with Parayko, Krug, and Falk all pretty much assured to be protected. The Kraken will happily take him and give him the top 4 role he wants. Next, from the Toronto Maple Leafs, Travis Dermott. Even with the Leafs adding players at the deadline, there still aren't many options here to choose from. There's really no one of relevance at forward, and it looks like Justin Hall is going to get that final protection spot ahead of Dermott and TJ Brodie. So that leaves Dermott as the choice here. He's younger and a lot cheaper than Brodie, and projects as a good 7th defenseman for the Kraken. Now from the Carolina Hurricanes, we have Jake Bean. Even after trading Hayden Fleury to the Ducks at the trade deadline, the Hurricanes have insane blue line depth. Looking at the protection list, you've got Slavin, Pesce, Shea, Bean, and Dougie Hamilton if they re-sign him. They can only protect 3 of those guys, and putting a potential Hamilton deal aside, it's gonna come down to Jake Bean versus Brady Shea. I've seen some say Bean is more likely to be protected, some say Shea. I'm inclined to believe it'll be Shea. He plays 21 minutes a night with the toughest defensive zone starts on the team. And that would leave Jake Bean exposed. He's a former first-round pick and has 11 points in 31 games this season. He's got excellent vision from the point, and he could easily be the Kraken's best defenseman in a couple years. Next, from the Edmonton Oilers, Caleb Jones. With the Oilers staying quiet at the trade deadline, Jones continues to look like the clear pick. He's the only younger NHL regular the Oilers have exposed. Archibald is past the point where he's going to get any better. Turris was just put on waivers, and Lagesson hasn't really broken into the lineup yet. Caleb is the younger brother of Blue Jackets defenseman Seth Jones, and his dad was NBA player Popeye Jones, so he's got good athletic bloodlines, and I think he's the best option here. Next, from the Boston Bruins, Jeremy Lauzon. Now, if you take a look at our updated protection list, we have a few options from the Bruins, and while it's tempting to go with a forward, Lauzon seems like the best choice here. He came back from injured reserve in late March and picked up right where he left off, playing big minutes on the top D pair alongside Charlie McAvoy, and he's thrived in that spot. I'd love to see what he could do on a pairing with, say, Devin Taves. I think he'll fit in really well with our group of young puck-moving defensemen. And finishing up our defensemen, we have Josh Mahura from the Anaheim Ducks. The Ducks were busy at the deadline, trading for defenseman Hayden Fleury, who we are projecting that they will protect in the expansion draft. And that leaves us with some enticing options on defense from the Ducks. Josh Manson, Kevin Shattenkirk, but we're going with Josh Mahura. He still has some developing to do defensively, but the offensive talent is undeniable. He has 12 points in 17 games with the San Diego Gulls this season and has consistently put up points at the NHL level too. With the lowest cap hit of all of our defensemen, he's a good low-cost prospect. Lastly, we have the goalies. And our goaltending situation hasn't really changed much with the trade deadline, as the 3 guys we have kind of separated themselves from the pack, which is great because this is how I think the Kraken should build their goalie tandem. 1 veteran guy who's had strong numbers over the past couple seasons, and 2 younger up-and-coming goalies in their mid-20s who have just broken into the league and could be starters for you soon, all while not spending too much. With this setup, we keep our cost-effective, high-upside goalie tandem. And our veteran option is Jake Allen from the Montreal Canadiens. While he is technically the backup to the highest paid goalie in the NHL, Carey Price, Allen has been the better goalie this season, outplaying Price at pretty much every turn. He's not really suited to a workhorse role though, averaging only about 30 games a season over the last 3 years, but with this group, he doesn't have to do that. I think he'd be a great piece in a Kraken goalie tandem, and it seems like he's the clear pick for Montreal. And the first of our 2 younger goalies is Adin Hill. WHL fans will remember him from his time with the Portland Winterhawks. He's got Pacific Northwest ties. He's from Comox, BC on Vancouver Island, and even wore a Seahawks hat when backing up during a playoff game last year. He has my highest confidence factor at a 9.5 because the pick just makes so much sense. There are hardly any other options on the Coyotes roster. Tyler Pitlick, some AHL forward. I'd rather have my potential goalie of the future. And Hill has shown glimpses of being just that. In the last month, he twice won both games of a back-to-back, first against the Sharks, then against the Kings and Ducks. There is still some room for improvement in his game, but he's shown the ability to be dominant at times. Keep an eye on him in the Coyotes' home stretch. It looks like he's got a great chance to be on the Kraken next season. And finally, we have Vitek Vanacek from the Washington Capitals. He's continued his run of good play through the trade deadline and is 5th in the NHL in wins with 17 as the better part of a tandem with Ilya Samsonov. If Adin Hill isn't quite ready yet developmentally next season, the Kraken can be confident that Vanacek can step in and play a bulk of the games to keep Jake Allen fresh. So there it is. That's where our projected roster stands post-trade deadline. Now that the dust is settled from the deadline, I think we got a lot of clarity on just what this team might look like. And I just want to say, it's been awesome to see all the comments, opinions, questions, and interaction with this projected roster since we first released it last month. Our original roster video recently hit 1,000 views, which was so cool to see that there was that much interest in it and what we're doing. I love talking about this stuff, thinking about all the possibilities, and it's been such a joy to share that with all of you. And of course, this is still a live updated roster, so check in often. We've still got a month of the season left and playoffs, so there will be plenty of things that change. And we'll have those changes reflected in the roster on the website as soon as they happen. I'm going to continue to post these videos explaining the changes we make and the thought process behind them once we have enough movement in the roster that builds up. And please continue to let us know what you think. Is there a pick you disagree with? Is there a certain player you'd love to see on the Kraken? Let us know in the comments or reach out to us on any of our social media. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at Emerald City HKY, here on YouTube, Emerald City Hockey, and on the website, emeraldcityhockey.com. Thanks everyone for watching, and go Kraken!